Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Ravens Table. Today we're going to talk about what is probably my favorite historical game, namely Hnefatafl. This is a game that emerged during the period that we now call the Viking Age, which lasted from about 793 to 1066 CE. And therefore some have taken to calling this game Viking chess, but Hnefatafl is the proper and more accepted name for this game. The name Hnefatafl translates as fist table, although some have also translated as king's table, and that will become clearer once we get into actually how to play the game. Here's an example of a Hnefatafl board. This version consists of an 11 by 11 board with specific spaces marked with different images. One of the interesting things about Hnefatafl is that it can be played on boards of different sizes. I've also seen boards that are 9 by 9 and 7 by 7, but the 11 and 9 sizes are probably the most common ones you'll encounter. But before we get into how to play the game, let's talk history. So, Hnefatafl is a game that has its origins in Viking Age Scandinavia. It probably evolved from a game from ancient Rome called Ludus Latron Colorem, which translates as the Game of Little Brigands, which that in turn was evolved from a Greek game called Petia. From Scandinavia, Hnefatafl expanded via trade, invasion, and immigration to the British Isles, and from there on to Iceland, Greenland, into mainland Europe, and even into the lands of the Rus in Western Asia. Over the years, boards, game pieces, and written accounts have been found in areas including Europe, Western Asia, and even the Middle East. And this game flourished until the arrival of the game that we now know as chess. But by the time chess became the most popular game in Europe during the 12th century, Hnefatafl was mostly forgotten. The last pre-modern era recorded mention of Tafl games was when they were mentioned in Wales during the year 1587. Rules for a Tafl game, as well as a sketch of the playing surface, were written down by the Swedish naturalist Carl Linnaeus in 1732. But because unfortunately the Norse weren't really a culture known for their written history, the rules for Hnefatafl have been largely reconstructed. The study of medieval manuscripts and examination of pieces and boards have allowed researchers and enthusiasts to figure out how the game was likely played. However, it is very certain that there were multiple variations of the game based on geographical location, local traditions, the year, etc. But in any event, it is quite evident that Hnefatafl was very important to the Norse culture. This is evidenced by the game's inclusion in boat burials as well as the artistic iconography of the era. For example, in Birka gravesite number 581, seen here, the game pieces were placed right next to the entombed individual. Perhaps this individual is anticipating the next life being full of gaming, fighting, feasting, and other pleasant pastimes. Another example would be from a runestone known as Sigurd's Stone number GS19, seen here. This stone was raised in the memory of a Norse son known as Svidvarthi, or Blackhaired. It was raised by his father Blesa and his mother Fridolfr, and on the stone is engraved an image of two people playing Hnefatafl, the one on the right also drinking from a raised horn. And then finally, in the saga of Herfor and Heidrek, Odin Allfather disguises himself and then challenges a king to a battle of wits. One of the questions that Odin asks is, "What women are they, warring together before their defenseless king? Day after day the dark guard him, but the fair go forth to attack." This question the king correctly answered with, "This is the game of Hnefatafl. The darker ones guard the king, but the white ones attack." So now let's take a look at some historical Hnefatafl boards and some game pieces. So these three boards are currently located in the Museum of Cultural History in Oslo, Norway. These two wooden boards are currently displayed in museums in Ireland. They were most likely crafted for use while aboard ship, given that they were designed to be used with pegged playing pieces, probably nails or slivers of wood. And each has a handle on either side of the board. This would allow two players seated on benches facing each other, each to keep a hand on the board while playing. This partial board clearly shows an 11 by 11 playing space, with some spaces marked with X's. This was likely owned by a higher status individual, given that it was purpose-built and much higher than usual quality. These Hnefatafl pieces were carved from amber and were found in a gravesite dated from the 9th century. These glass pieces are known as the Birka 523 set and contain pieces representing both sides of the game, including the king piece. This exquisite piece was found in 2019 on the island of Lindisfarne. It has been dated from the 8th or 9th century and likely represents a king piece given its crown of white spheres on top. So now that we've had a brief history lesson, let's have some fun and learn how to play Hnefatafl. Okay, so before we dive into how to play Hnefatafl, I'm going to start with a caveat. So, as we discussed before, this game is largely reconstructed from fragmentary sources, whether they be boards that were dug out of the ground, glass pieces found in a gravesite, or written accounts of the game written centuries after its heyday. This is a game that people have had to kind of backwards engineer and figure out how it was probably played, so therefore that means that there are a lot of different versions of the game out there. All of them are fun that I've played. It's just very important that if you're going to play with someone, especially for the first time, that you agree ahead of time under what rules you'll be playing. The worst thing would be for you to get halfway through a game and then for one player or the other to get upset because they weren't expecting, a particular type of move or a rule to be applied, that kind of thing. So just sit down at the beginning of the game, agree how you're going to be playing, you'll have a lot more fun. So today we'll be playing on this 11 by 11 board here. This is one of the more common sizes that you'll see out there, but it's not the only size. Hnefatafl can actually be played on different sizes, including 9 by 9 or 7 by 7. This one's obviously crafted out of wood. I made this one a year or so ago. It's fairly fancy, but don't think that you have to have something as fancy as this to play the game. Here's a version that was gifted to me a couple of years ago that has a 7 by 7 board burned into the back of a rabbit skin. And it even has a 9-men's Morris board on here as well, which if you're looking to learn how to play that game, check out my other videos. We've already covered that one. And then here's another version that I picked up a while back. This one's printed on a piece of canvas. It's also an 11 by 11 board. But the nice thing about this one is that they travel really, really easily. You can actually take all your game pieces, put them into here, and turn this into a little sack, tie it around the top, and throw it in your pocket, and off you go. So it's really, really, really convenient. Talking about the game pieces we're going to be playing with, today we're going to be playing with a set of game pieces that is a reproduction of a set that was found in Sweden and currently lives in the Swedish Museum. We saw them earlier in some photos. So you've got 3 different types of pieces out there. These 2 are from that same set there. They're made with glass. And then this one is a reproduction of a piece that was dug out of the island of Lindisfarne back in 2019, which if you were paying attention to the news at that time, that was a really big archaeological discovery. So if you ever wanted to know what it looked like in person, that's kind of what it looked like. So we'll explain what these pieces mean a little bit later once we actually get into the game itself. So at its heart, Hnefatafl is a game of battle. It's is unlike most modern games in that the 2 sides are uneven. It's not like chess or checkers or anything like that where both players have the exact same number of pieces of the exact same types. This one is from the outside perspective, it looks like it's lopsided. The 2 sides are actually pretty fair as far as like win percentages, but the 2 sides have different numbers, which if you think about battle and war, you don't have 2 sides with the exact same number of troops and the exact same type of weaponry lining up across from the battle or across from each other on the field and marching into each other and doing battle. Battle is frequently one-sided, so this kind of replicates that in that the 2 sides have different starting positions, different number of pieces, and even have different victory conditions, and we'll cover that here in a minute. The 2 sides here are represented on the board but in their starting positions here. You have one side starts with where all these axes are here, and the other side is these pieces here in the center with all the shields. Carl Linnaeus, who we discussed earlier, described the defending pieces here as the Swedes and the attackers out here on the outside as the Muscovites. That's likely what it was known by in that particular point in time, in that particular place in geography at that time. Most of the time you're going to hear people describe this game as being played as the attackers are on the outside and the defenders on the inside, and that's the terminology we'll use today. Just so you know, Swedes, as people from Sweden. Muscovites is the demonym for folks who resided at that time in the Grand Duchy of Moscow, which is the precursor to what we know as the capital of Russia. If you look into your Norse Viking history, the Norse actually went out that way, and the name Russia comes from the word Rus, which was one of the groups that came out of Scandinavia, the Rus Vikings. Fascinating read. We're not going to go into it much here, but if you've got some time, I encourage you to look into it. So talking about the game pieces, I showed you the ones we'll be using here today. But again, don't feel like you have to have something that's that really fancy. I mean, there are lots of other ways to play this game. So this is a piece that it was obviously carved out of wood to represent a warrior with a shield. And then this is a piece that I purchased as a set that's made out of resin, but it's a replica of a set that was carved out of, I believe it was walrus ivory. So these are obviously pretty fancy too, but if it just means that you're getting in and playing the game, and honestly most of the time when I have a travel board with me, I don't bring the fancy stuff out. I play with these just glass stones that you can pick up at any hobby store. Most of the time they're used for like filling up glass jars full of fake plants, and they come in innumerable sizes and colors, so you can very easily just have a bag full of these things and play the game with this. This is what I use almost all the time. You can even play with two different types of coins, pennies and nickels, that kind of thing. So don't feel like, again, like you have to have something that's super fancy. So, but through the application of modern filmography, we're going to go ahead and now we have a populated board. So as you can see, the attackers are represented by these black pieces here, and the defenders are represented by the blue pieces. But you'll also notice that we have this one here in the center that is different than all the other defenders, and this is that one that I showed you earlier that was a reproduction of the piece from Lindisfarne. This is the most important piece on the board, and that's the king. It's important because it's the focus of both sides and their victory conditions. For the defenders, the blue here in the center, it is their job to get the king off of the battlefield. So they're trying to save their king and defend the king long enough for him to escape the battlefield and live. And it's the job of the attackers to, I bet you can guess, yep, it's the attacker's job to kill the king, to prevent the king from escaping the board. So how does a king escape? Well, the king escapes by getting to one of these four corners here represented by the little triskells. So let's get into how things actually move in this game and how you go around killing the king and other pieces. I start off by saying that all of the pieces in this game, regardless of whether they're the attackers, the defenders, or the king, they all move in the exact same way. They move just like a rook does in chess, or some people might call it a castle, meaning they can move up and down, left and right, as many spaces as they want, with no jumping. So if for the first moves, let's say the attackers were going first, they want to take this piece and move it all the way over to here, they could. They can move it to a few spaces down this way, they could, or they can even move it one space that way. It's all completely legal. So up, down, left, right, as many spaces as you want, no jumping. Like I said, that goes for everything. Now, capturing pieces. The way that pieces are captured in this game is by surrounding them on two opposite sides. So think about it's you and your buddy surrounding an enemy, and you both go whack and you kill the enemy and they're now dead. So for example, let's say we were in this position here and it was the attacker's turn to go again. So they could slide one piece up right to here, surrounding this blue piece here on two sides, and that piece is then removed from the game and they're gone. Okay, and that applies to the king as well. So just surrounding the king on two sides. So there's a couple of caveats that I want to bring up here because they're pretty important to the way that we play the game. These corner pieces here always count as opponents for purposes of capture, and I'll explain why. Without this little rule, there's a really cheesy way for the attackers to win in 8 moves, and it's simply to just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And they've blocked off all of the ways that the king could escape the board. and there's literally no way to win. And because the king is surrounded by his own troops here, and it takes some time to unwind all of this, you know, if you didn't have this rule, it would be way too easy for the attackers to win, just full stop. So when I say that this space counts as purposes as an opponent for purposes of capture, meaning you could, like if you came into this situation, you went and you slid into there because you've now surrounded this black piece by yourself and the corner space, then this one goes away. Okay, so it's a way to keep the corners from being perennially blocked and just, you know, permanently blocked, basically. All right. So a couple of other important pieces to note here. It is possible to move into what looks like a capture position safely, and you're fine. So let's say this is our position here. This defender here can move in between those two and stay there. That's where their move ends, and be completely safe. The thought is that they move into there and they're aware that they're being surrounded and they can take action, whereas if you came in like this and attacked them, then both of you just gang up at the same time. So just bear that in mind. And also bear in mind, it is possible, it's not very common, but it is possible to capture more than one piece at a time, and I'll show you how that works. So let's say this is our starting position here. Okay. So if the attacker was to move into here, you've now captured this blue piece because you're surrounded in there, and you've actually captured this blue piece here by surrounding them at the same time. So you've captured both of these blue ones at the same time, and they're both gone. It's actually, I've seen that happen a few times. Not all that common. Maybe one game out of 10. It's actually theoretically possible to capture 3 pieces at a time by having them into this T-shaped. But I've actually never seen it happen in an actual gameplay. But just, again, be aware that it can happen. So let's go ahead and we'll walk through a game here real fast and show you kind of how the gameplay actually goes. Typically, I usually play with the defenders going first. You can flip a coin, roll a die, however you like, but in this case, we'll just go ahead and start with the defenders. So as I mentioned before, the defenders have to start moving their own pieces out of the way, otherwise the king never can move off of his starting position. So our first job is to just get some troops out of the way, hopefully and not sacrificing too many of them at the same time. So we're just going to move that piece there. Now it's the attacker's turn. Attackers are going to move to there. Defenders are going to move to right there, surrounding this black piece and capturing it. So I'm going to put that over there. Attackers are going to move to there. Defenders are going to move to here. Attackers going to move to here. Defenders are going to move that piece out of the way. Attackers are going to move to there. So now that the defenders have got a channel by which the king can start moving, it is a legal move now for the king to move off of that center space. But in this case, we're not going to do that yet. We're going to move that one to there. Attackers are going to move to there. Defenders are going to move that up and capture this piece. Attackers are going to move to there. See, defenders are going to move that piece to the side. Attackers are going to move up to here. The defenders are going to move the king off of the center and out to this space right there. The attackers are going to work at blocking the king by going to there. the defenders are going to take their king and move out to here. But the attacker wasn't, sorry, the defenders weren't paying attention, and the attacker just surrounded the king on 2 spaces and captured the king, and now the king is off the board and the king lost. So in this case, the attacker, the black pieces, they won. So real quick game there, but it kind of showed you how the gameplay can go. If you do have any questions about any of that, feel free to leave a comment below. I'll try and answer that. But now let's talk about some of the variations that you may experience or you may run into while you're playing the game with other folks. I'm not going to claim that this is a comprehensive list of all variations out there, but these are some of the ones that I've run across or ones that I've read about and seem fun. So let's just jump into this. So first thing is when I showed you the game earlier, the king was able to be captured on just 2 sides. One of the more common ways to play, one of the more alternative ways to play, is that it takes 4 pieces to capture the king because the king's extra tough or something like that. That is a valid variant that you may run across. I personally tend not to play that way because I think it makes capturing the king a little bit too hard and therefore makes it more likely that defenders will win, but that's just my opinion. Other people may disagree with me there. But that's one of the more common things that you'll see. This center space here where the king starts, there are a number of rules that could govern that. Some people will play where it's just a normal space and anybody can go on there, no problem. Others may play such that this space is counted or considered to be the king's throne, and therefore only the king can sit on it. So, if the king moves off of it, other pieces cannot stop on it because it's throne, and none of them are the king. They can go through it, they just can't stop on it. Other people will play where they can't even go through it. Like that space is a blocker for everybody except for the king. And I've even seen ways people will play sometimes where that once the king gets off of the throne, even the king can't get back on it. It's like you start there, once you step off, it's now a blocker for everybody. So just keep any of those in mind. Let's see. Some people will play that these starting positions for the attackers are considered encampments, and what that means is that those encampments can be considered hostile to the defenders. So even if there's not a piece in the space, let's say that there's a defender there, even though there's not somebody there, if an attacker were to move right there, it's kind of like what I described earlier with those corners being counted as opponents for purposes of capture. Same thing for these encampments here. They count as attackers for purposes of capture. So in this case, if the attacker was to move there, this piece would be removed from the board. It's a fun little variation that I've seen played a few times. Most of the time you'll find that people will play such that the king has to get to the corner to escape. I've seen some people play where it's off the board in any capacity. They can go here and slide off the board to right there, and boom, the king escaped, and you're done. I tend to think that makes it a little bit too easy for the king to escape, but maybe if you're playing with a player who's maybe new to the game, and you want to give them a fighting chance, you could have them play the defenders, and then they can just, as soon as they get the king off the board in any direction, they've won the game. Most of the time you'll find that when played, the king can capture just like any other piece. The king is considered armed at that point. So if this is the position we're looking at, and for some reason the king wanted to move up to there, the king can capture that attacker right there, no problem. But some people will play where the king is weaponless, meaning the king is kind of like the king in chess, where it's a fairly weak piece. They can play the king so the king is not armed and therefore can't participate in capture. I've seen people play where earlier I described that pieces can move as unlimited number of spaces in any up, down, or left, right direction. Some people play where it's only one space at a time. You can still move up, down, left, right, but it's only one space at a time. I've played it that way a couple of times. It doesn't make the game any harder, it just makes the game longer, because it does allow people to think a little bit more, so maybe perhaps brings some more strategy into the game, makes the game a little bit less frenetic, but it does make the game length go a lot longer. There's an interesting variation of Hnefatafl, which is a very modern variant. It's called Berserk Hnefatafl. The neat thing about that version is it introduces several new types of pieces into the game. It introduces a knight piece and a commander piece, and a new type of ways that pieces can move called berserk moves, hence the name Berserk Hnefatafl. I'm not going to go into the whole rule set right now because it's a little complicated, but if you're looking for an interesting variant, definitely look up Berserk Hnefatafl. It is fun. One more thing I'll bring up. I have run Hnefatafl tournaments before, and the way that I found that those work best is you can have it run your normal tree type of tournament structure, right? As far as like, the pieces, you have players starting, and then the winners of that one go on to the next round, and eventually you have the finals. You can still run it that way, but what I've found is because the sides are uneven, and it's not exactly a 50-50 chance of winning, what I tend to do is for each round or each matchup, both players end up playing both sides. So for game one, the first player plays the defenders, the second player plays the attackers, and then for the second game they switch. If one person wins both games, great, you're done. But frequently what happens is each player will win one game each. So how do you break that tie? What I do is I will say that the player that lost the fewest number of pieces over both games, that's the tiebreaker. So it kind of forces you to be a little bit less casual about losing troops, but it does mean that you have to accurately record every time that you lose a piece, because at the end you may need that to be that tiebreaker. And it's that way through the whole game. But it also gives each player the opportunity to play both sides during the tournament. But since this is a reconstructed game, if you think you've got a cool idea for a new variation, go for it. I mean, that's one of the things that I like about this is it's not exactly the same rules every single time. I love meeting people who will introduce me to a variation that I haven't played before, and I'll be like, all right, this is great, let's play it. And it makes the game a lot more fun for me. So in addition to there being variations of rules, there's also variations of board size and starting position. I showed you a couple of examples of different board sizes earlier, but as you can see right now, these are variations on both board size and starting position. The layout that I showed you at the beginning is by far not the only one. As you can see, there are a lot of different options, and this is not a comprehensive list. This is just some of the ones that I've personally run into or I thought were interesting. Talking about kind of the descendants, if you will, of Hnefatafl. It's known as the Tafl family of games, Tafl meaning table. This image here is a picture of a 9x9 board, and this is straight from Carl Linnaeus, who I've mentioned a couple of times before. This is his image of the game of tableau that was he sketched in his book Expedition to Lapland, and it was his description of this game and how it was played that forms a lot of the rules that we use for Hnefatafl right now. But there's also games such as this one called Alea Evangelii, which translates to Game of the Gospels. This one is a game from the 11th century Ireland, and it's played on an 18x18 board, but it's played on the intersections, not on the spaces. It's a very fun game. It can take a while to play because there's so many pieces, but it is definitely worth playing if you're enjoying Hnefatafl. I encourage you to look up this one as well. So that's it for today's look at Hnefatafl. If you look in the video description below, there's a link to a document that contains instructions on how to play, as well as a printable game board. If you were looking for a reproduction glass Hnefatafl set of your own, I've also included the contact information for the artisan who crafted mine. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment below. Also, if you have any suggestions for games that you'd like to see me cover in future videos, I'd love to hear those. But be sure to stay subscribed for more videos looking at historical gaming, as well as how you can make your own games and accessories. So until next time, I wish you luck and look forward to seeing you again at the Raven's Table.